So for this video, I want to ask you a really simple question. Do you prefer cards to be heavily modal, or do you prefer them to be heavily specialized but efficient? How's it going, guys? And today we're not doing a deck tech. Today I want to go ahead and open up the forum for discussion. That means in the comment section, I want to see y'all's opinions on this because I am of a very particular flavor when it comes to this very particular topic, but I do want to know what y'all's thoughts are as well. And today we are focusing mostly on removal, though this discussion could bridge its way into multiple styles of Magic the Gathering. There's lots of mana dorks I like that do more than one thing, for instance, but we're not focusing on those right now. We are focusing on the cards that y'all need to be running more of in your deck anyway. Now, before we get into this discussion and before you start typing away in the comment section about how much you absolutely adore Swords to Plowshare and how dare I say anything bad about it, I haven't yet, but trust me, I will. I want to go ahead and get the definitions out of the way very, very quickly. So there are two types of spells we are looking at. We are looking mostly at cards like, say, Swords to Plowshare that say, hey, I am one of the most mana efficient, strongest cards in my class, but I do one thing, and I do one thing really well. On the other end of the spectrum, we are looking at cards that cost a little bit more, but maybe hit more targets, but also have some type of downside, like, say, Get Lost. So before I make any arguments, I want to go ahead and see what y'all think in the comment section below, so that we have sort of a baseline for how things are. All right, you done typing? You can pause the video, type out your opinions on which ones you like, which cards you prefer more of, and then we'll get into this discussion. So, I gave an example of best-in-class cards, but there's more examples that we can use here. For every single Swords to Plowshare, you are going to also find a Path to Exile. For every single Pongify, you're also going to see a Rapid Hybridization. For every Infernal Grasp, I mean, you would technically find Fell, but like, the Infernal Grasp is at least doing a job, and Fatal Push is doing that job more efficiently, but it's really asking you to pretend you're playing Modern. For green, you've got stuff like Nature's Claim, which is the most mana-efficient version of this narrow ability, or you've got Frozen Grip, which is still a very good card, but adds Split Second on top of it. I would say these two are probably your best-in-class cards. And then in red, you got stuff like Vandal Blast. For 1 mana, blow up an artifact you don't control. That is best in class in terms of what red can do for mana efficiency, and you have the option to overload it to do more. Now, aside from Fatal Push, I'm sure that almost every one of you have included these in your commander decks at some point in time, especially the next card I'm going to talk about, which is Swan Song, one of the strongest counter spells in Magic the Gathering, period. This is ran at CDH tables. This is ran basically anywhere you can manage. And of course, you can throw the free spells into this as well, like Deadly Rollick if you want, but I'm not really including those right now because I just do not like those cards to begin with. So how do y'all feel about these style of cards? These best-in-class, strongest at what they do, and the most mana-efficient versions of these spells. I personally don't like them. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I'm not a big fan of the most mana efficient, the strongest at what it does cards in Magic the Gathering. Now, obviously, there are two sides to that particular opinion. Now, if you see a Swords to Plowshare, right, it's $3, or sometimes it's 80 cents or $1. Either way, if you're looking at my channel, you're probably assuming I'm going to go for a budget card like Bovine Intervention, and yeah, I do actually prefer Bovine Intervention to cards like Swords to Plowshare. My reasoning is really simple. This doesn't just get rid of a creature, this can also kill an artifact. Yes, it costs 1 more mana, but a card like this, in my opinion, is applicable in more situations. And if you want to dig into the other colors, I like cards like Refute more than I like cards like Swan Song. Yes, you have to hold up a little bit of extra mana, but if you are playing a deck that can afford to hold up that mana to begin with, it's got a heavy ramp package, it's very low to the curve, any number of those things, The extra draw power and the more spells that Refute is able to hit just does it better for me, even more than cards like Fierce Guardianship. Yes, those cards are stronger, I just don't prefer them. And when it comes to dual-colored removal, I'll gladly take the budget options of Mortify, Despark, Putrefy, and Drag to the Roots over their far more mana-efficient cousins, because these cards are very, very affordable. But those are just the budget cards we're talking about. There's plenty of cards that don't strictly fit into the budget archetype that we got to talk about. And what I mean is not just going for the most efficient cards, because those tend to be expensive. I'm looking at you, Swansong, $10, but grabbing cards that are either modal or multi-function. Now, these are very different terms, and I understand that I'm going to be using these in kind of a bespoke way, so let me go ahead and lay down what I mean by both of these. A modal card is a card like, say, Thraben Charm or Return to Nature. These can blow up one of a variety of cards in a variety of situations, but they do one thing. It happens once, it does its job, and then it goes away. This is my definition of a modal card. A multi-function card, however, is a card that does its job and then serves a secondary purpose afterwards. A Trigon Predator is a great example of this. This blows up an artifact or an enchantment, yes, but it also sticks around as a flying creature, which can be used for blocking for your planeswalkers. It can be used for getting in there and making sure that you are drawing cards off of a Bident of Thassa. It can be used in a variety of situations over and above just being a removal card. So what are some of my personal favorite modal cards, and why do I like them? Again, this is an open discussion. I want to know what y'all's opinions are between your favorite mana efficient cards and your favorite modal cards or multi-function cards in the comment section below. And I want to know if you agree with my personal opinion that I would rather have these multi-function cards that cost more mana, or you don't. But just hear me out with my reasonings behind these cards as to why I like them. Yes, Nature's Claim is the most efficient card at getting rid of an artifact or enchantment, but if I'm not playing CDH, why would I not want to run Return to Nature? It blows up the same number of things, but for one extra mana, I have the modality to effectively counterspell a Reanimate or a Victimize, or any kind of card that is yanking something out of the graveyard, an Animate Dead. That exile target card from a graveyard is at instant speed after all. And while I do love Swords to Plowshares, if I'm using a go wide deck, why would I not want to use Thraben Charm instead? This can get rid of a creature, but it can also stop graveyard decks, and it can also get rid of an enchantment, depending on what situation that I am in. Yes, I could use the strongest in class Assassin's Trophy, blowing up any permanent a player controls, but there are just as many situations where an Abrupt Decay will do the job too. Or a Maelstrom Pulse will do that job just as well. And the Maelstrom Pulse has the added benefit of being able to get rid of all of the tokens somebody has. If somebody smacks me with an Ezreal's Predation, I certainly want to go ahead and activate this and get rid of everything they have that is a token that has the same name as the one they just beat my face in with. And we can talk about some of the most modal cards there are, cards that can blow up any kind of permanent. Stroke of Midnight, Generous Gift, and Beast Within. These cards are not only highly modal, but they are very borderline best in class. Yes, I don't gain the split second of a Crozen Verge. Yes, I don't gain the mana efficiency of a Nature's Claim, but I gain the ability to get rid of a land. I gain the ability to get rid of a Planeswalker. I gain the ability to get rid of anything that I possibly could want with a Beast Within. All I have to do is be willing to sink a little bit of extra mana into it. A Stroke of Midnight is doing similar things, and it's also a great budget card on top of that. And you know what? Another card that borders heavily on being a best-in-class card while also being heavily modal, Rakdos Charm. This can get rid of graveyards. This can turn token players into Swiss cheese. This can get rid of a Bolas's Citadel. This card is so goddamn good, and it is right there in the middle. Actually, it hits all 3 points. It's a budget card, it's under $1, it's a modal card, it exiles a thing from a grave, everything from a grave. It gets rid of artifacts, it gets rid of an entire player if they've built a token army, and of course, it is mana efficient at 2 mana. It does everything. But I also don't think that we should throw our noses up at cards like Bedevil. It blows up artifacts, creatures, or planeswalkers. That's actually more modality than you would think. It's an abrade that says destroy instead of dealing 3 damage. This means if my opponent has dropped down a Teferi and they are trying to build up to extra turns, I can go ahead and snipe that thing out of the way, and I can do it with a way more powerful and reasonable rate than trying to bash it in with a bunch of creatures that may get blocked, or, you know, any number of ways that situation could go wrong with a Braid, where it would just have more loyalty than what Bedevil is just sniping away. And then, of course, if we are talking about heavy modality, then we need to talk about some of the most modal cards in Magic the Gathering. And I am, of course, talking about MDFCs. I am so happy that more of the community is turning around on MDFCs and is starting to enjoy these cards more. But I do think that the community still isn't really on board with certain MDFCs. And the main one I think is Hagra Mauling. I don't see people running Hagra Mauling. I do see people running Fell the Profane, as it blows up a creature or a planeswalker, and that's fantastic. Its backside is a shock land, or a bolt land rather, that can come into play untapped, but people seem to be completely averse to running any tapped lands if they can help it. And so cards like Hagra Mauling end up getting thrown by the wayside instead of being ran alongside Fell the Profane. Yes, Hagra Mauling is not as powerful as Fell the Profane. It is not. It is objectively not as powerful. Its front side discountability is never going to happen in a game of Magic the Gathering, and the Hagra Blood Pit side comes into play tapped. Yes, it is a weaker card than Fell the Profane, but I think that the benefit of running both of these is they are 2 free slots. If you are running your basic 37 land package, these are free includes. And if you're running a more powerful land package that is leaning heavier into having more lands, like Rebel Lily has been mentioning on her channel, then you may end up wanting to run these MDFCs in place of other removal you might have been running, just to get your deck kind of artificially, but still very, very legitimately up to the 42 and 43 land counts, so that you always have access to what you need. And I know that people really like cards like Farewell because they are the most efficient way to get rid of everything possible, but for 2 more mana, I actually prefer Ondu Inversion. This is one of my favorite board wipes of all time. I love the fact that it's an MDFC. I love the fact that it says destroy instead of exile. I love the fact that it resets everything, but it does so on a turn that you are very likely to be faced with overwhelming odds. 4 mana board wipes getting rid of creatures is fantastic. 6 mana board wipes being able to get rid of most permanents is fantastic. And 8 mana board wipe should be able to get rid of all non-land permanents. This is not super reasonably costed, given that you won't have a turn afterwards, but still, it has the ability to fix up your lands. That cannot be ignored. And there is one more class of modal card we have to talk about before we get into the multifunction ones, and that is the cards that are very, very, very barely breaking out of their color pie. Withering Torment is one of the best examples of this because there are 2, count them, 2 mana efficient ways to get rid of enchantments in black. They are Withering Torment and Feed the Swarm. Everything else is either colorless or is ridiculously overcosted, like Baleful Beholder. As much as I enjoy cards like that, cards like Withering Torment are few and far between and do need to be attained if you have not already. They are fantastic removal, and if you are running, say, a Dimir deck, which will always struggle with being able to get rid of enchantments permanently, then you probably should be running a Feed the Swarm and a Withering Torment in your deck anyway. No, they are not as mana efficient as running a Fatal Push or, you know, the Invoke Despair. Not Invoke Despair, that's not the one I was thinking of. Infernal Grasp, that's the one. Yes, they're not as mana efficient as those because they are, in the case of Feed the Swarm, have a heavy life cost and also are sorceries, but at the same time, these are cards that do things that Black typically struggles with, so you use them to patch up what your deck is struggling with to begin with. But that's enough about modal cards. What about multi-function cards? Well, let's go ahead and start with Vandal Blast. Yes, this is the best in class red removal spell for getting rid of artifacts, but there is one thing Vandal Blast does not do that my preferred option does do. If you look at Ansrag's Rampage, this is my preferred option over Vandal Blast. Yes, it's an 18-cent card. Yes, that means that it's great for budget decks, and I have a personal bias towards it as a result of that. But here's my argument. Ansrag's Rampage does what Vandal Blast does in most situations, but it doesn't suffer from a couple of its weaknesses. For one of those weaknesses is the obvious: it's a 1-mana spell. If you're playing a deck with Cascade or Discover and you're in red, so you probably have a little bit of that in there somewhere, hitting a Vandal Blast off of that sucks hard. But an Ansrag's Rampage is either always viable off of the Cascade or just doesn't get cast and therefore is perfectly fine to skip over during your Cascade or Discover triggers. That personal bit aside, my other reason for liking Ansrag's Rampage is that one of the side effects of paying 5 mana for a big board wipe is the effect of losing your turn. A lot of times when you are backed into the corner of having to use a board wipe, you don't get to do any follow-up plays, but Ansrag's Rampage has you covered there. You blow up all artifacts you don't control, and then you get a free creature until end of turn that then goes into your hand. So this card is effectively a cantrip that is getting you a free hasted creature sneak attack style, but then you don't sacrifice the creature, it just goes into your hand, hence being a cantrip. This is such a powerful card, and at 18 cents, I believe that barely anybody is running the damn thing. And yet, it costs the same amount of mana as Vandal Blast's Overload side, doesn't have the weakness of Vandal Blast when being ran in decks that use things like Cascade or Discover, and most importantly, it has a follow-up effect that is so goddamn powerful in dragon decks, in dinosaur decks, in any big green Gruul Stompy decks. This thing does so much more work than just Vandal Blast, but more often than not, players will always gravitate to the Vandal Blast because of the modality of the 1-mana option that almost nobody ends up using in the first place. I recognize the validity of going for hyper mana efficiency when playing CEDH. You do not have a choice there. You are having to make every decision that you possibly can make based on the metagame of CEDH. But when you're playing casual Commander, you do have those options. You don't have to pick the most mana efficient spell. You can pick the spell that does the job, and in this case, for the same amount of mana technically, but it does more than just hitting the one permanent. And there's another card that I've noticed that very few people play, but I think more people should, and that's Decimate. This, for 4 mana, blows up 4 cards. That is a fantabulous rate of return, but I see arguments against this card quite often at my card shop, and I see arguments against this card quite often in general. The arguments are, it requires you to blow up 1 of every type, and there is the nasty effect in there of blowing up a target land, and some players really hate getting rid of lands, but I need to go ahead and point out that cards like Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, 3-Tree City, Fountain Port, Cabal Coffers are all very powerful lands, and Glacial Chasm is one too that can get rid of your ability to swing at all. Decimate gets rid of those. Decimate also gets rid of an artifact creature and an enchantment, and sometimes the argument can be made that Decimate will not be able to see one of each of those cards on a board, but I would wager, and I would also say in my experience, with 4 players at the table, there's almost always somebody playing some kind of enchantment, Rhystic Study, Propaganda, Smothering Tithe, some bullshit like that, on top of artifacts, which they're always running. Everybody runs mana rocks. Creatures are easy. Everybody has to run creatures. Your commander is almost always a creature. And lands, everybody is running lands, and everybody should understand that a utility land is a perfectly viable target with a card like Decimate. Yes, it sets you back a turn, but that's not the worst thing in the world. Also, if you're a green player and you get upset that I've blown up a Mosswort Bridge, you can just suck it up. I'm sorry. That Mosswort Bridge was going to be free casting a spell, and it's also just land ramp in green. You should be okay with losing a little bit of it if you're going to be okay Nature's Claiming somebody's Soul Ring. That said, some of my other just absolute favorite multifunction cards are Imprison of the Moon and Darksteel Mutation. I love that these cards are incredibly powerful in Commander, and while cards like Imprison of the Moon do cost a little bit, remember that a lot of board wipes, even the ones that get rid of all permanents, say non-land permanent. So the Imprison of the Moon is going to put a creature on lockdown for a very, very long time. Yes, it has the side effect of the non-land permanent board wipe, killing the Imprison of the Moon, therefore bringing the commander back, but there's the added benefit that that commander is going to be very hard to get off of the board for 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 turns. It's very often players do not have the ability to get rid of something that is trapped under Imprison of the Moon. And because so many players build their commander decks in a way where their commander is a central linchpin to their strategy, this is a completely viable way of shutting those decks off. And honestly, in just terms of deck construction, if your deck relies so heavily on only your commander to function, you should have ways in your deck of solving this exact problem. High Market is a great way to get rid of this. Blowing up your own commander is a great way to get rid of this. Or, you know, just running enchantment removal, which your deck should be doing in the first place. I also really like Wear Down, as it gets rid of 2 artifacts or enchantments, and it can even be used as a small political piece as well. I love Binding the Old Gods because it is basically omni removal that also allows you to have ramp and also allows you to be able to freely swing with creatures because nobody wants to block a bunch of Death Touchers. I also like Death Sprout. It's an instant speed Binding the Old Gods that only kills creatures, but again, it's instant speed Binding the Old Gods. I get to blow up a creature and then get a land, and it's the exact same cost. Or if I'm spending that kind of mana, I could also run Atomize. If I'm running a Super Friends deck, this card is so goddamn fantastic. And yeah, an Assassin's Trophy is technically better. It is more mana efficient, but Atomize is going to be doing this job while also proliferating, meaning it is infinitely more thematic, infinitely more fun, and builds me up to my deck's game plan in a far more synergistic way than just putting in the stronger, more mana efficient removal. If I'm running an Aristocrats deck, Ruthless Lawbringer is fantastic because sacrificing your own permanents is a thing that deck wants to do all the time. And if you're running, say, Edgar Markov, Ruthless Lawbringer also can sacrifice Edgar's tokens, which you have a plethora of to begin with. And it's a vampire, so you're spawning another token anyway. Honestly, cards like this, they can get rid of so many kinds of permanents, and they work in aristocrat and tribal strategies so well, I wish more people would just run them. I also really like Hogla the Titan Ape. Being able to get rid of one type of permanent when it comes out, and then being able to get rid of more types of permanents later in the game, while also having the added benefit of being able to gain Indestructible on a whim? Jesus Christ, it is no wonder this card is, well, 6 mana. It does so much. It's not an unpopular card. Thankfully, players do recognize the power of the ape when he's out, but I think that players tend to gravitate away from stuff like this when there are more mana-efficient options available and they're not strictly playing a big mana deck. But I think cards like this are still perfectly valid outside of big mana decks because of the sheer amount of things that they are doing. And there is one more card that I want to talk about. It is not super modal and it is not super multifunction, but it does kind of bridge the gap between the two of those because of its unique typing, unique mana cost, and the amount of things that it can blow up. This entire video technically is an argument for running more modal cards that do more things, even if they cost more mana. but it's also an apologetic video to gush about Meteor Golem. Now, hear me out. One, you've got 12 Meteor Golems in your couch cushions. They come in a lot of precons. You just have them somewhere, I promise you. Secondly, at 7 mana, I can see why people don't want to run this. I can see why you really wouldn't want to run this. But let me go ahead and give you my arguments. Meteor Golem does something that no other card on this list does. It's colorless. This means it solves problems that several decks tend to have. Blue suffers from not being able to permanently remove most things from the board at a good rate. Red suffers from not being able to kill enchantments. Black suffers from not being able to kill artifacts and struggling to kill most enchantments. Green suffers from non-fight removal. And white really doesn't suffer from anything, but it is the exception, not the rule. What does Meteor Golem do for all of these colors? Solves every one of their problems. And for each and every one of those colors, there is a way to make Meteor Golem work for you. In red, there are abundant artifact synergies that can discount the cost of Meteor Golem, rip it out of the graveyard onto the battlefield via a scrap wielder style effect. There's tons of ways to make Meteor Golem work for you in red without having to sink the 7 mana into it. In black, the answer's pretty obvious. Reanimate the Meteor Golem. That will always give you a nice mana efficient way to get rid of anything on a board that you just do not like. In blue, you do have to eat the cost of the Meteor Golem half the time, but you have the benefit of blink spells. So the Meteor Golem may not be doing a lot for you the turn it comes down, but over the course of a game, you can keep blinking that Meteor Golem and getting its effect over and over again so that you can start suppressing players' boards. Also in blue, you have access to cloning, so yes, that initial 7 mana into the Meteor Golem sucks, but afterwards, being able to just get more copies of it, blink it, do all those things that let you abuse it are fantastic. In green, there really is no excuse because Meteor Golem's a 7 mana card and you're playing fucking green. Rampant growths just come out of your snot when you sneeze. You can manage cards like Meteor Golem in green just fine. And for white, don't even get me started. We've already talked about blinking and reanimating, and white does both blinking and reanimating. You could get Meteor Golem out for less mana than normal via the reanimation half of what white can do, and you can make this card infinitely more efficient because you have access to blink spells, letting you get 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 10 permanents off of a board. And don't even get me started on giving Meteor Golem Myriad with cards like Legion Loyalty that are in white. Every single color has a way to abuse a Meteor Golem. Every single one. And yet, if there is any card that I love and have advocated for more on this channel that players simply do not like on average, it is probably Meteor Golem. It is one of the first cards to get removed from any precon during an upgrade process. It is one of the first cards to be argued against due to its mana and due to there being other cards that cost as much and do similar, like Spine of Ishath, but they don't have the benefit of being a creature, for instance. There's so many cards that are technically better than Meteor Golem, but because Meteor Golem is a high-cost card that can be reanimated, that happens to be an artifact, that also happens to be a creature that gets rid of any type of non-land permanent, this card alone patches up problems in every single color that struggles to find specific kinds of removal, and every color has a way to abuse Meteor Golem to the nines. I am a fan of modal removal. I am a fan of cards that, while not being the most mana efficient, solve the most problems. And Meteor Golem epitomizes that higher than almost any card on this list. It doesn't just fix problems on a board state, it fixes problems in the deck construction phase. And yet people really, really do not like Meteor Golem. I just do not understand why. That all said, those are my thoughts. I am more of a fan of hyper-modal removal. I am more of a fan of multifunction removal. I am more of a fan of mana inefficient and yet far more interesting removal that gets me out of more situations and is nowhere near as narrow. I think the community at large tends to favor the more mana efficient cards. The only argument I can give for only using the mana efficient cards is when you happen to be playing a deck that needs that mana efficiency so goddamn much that you basically choke if you can't. And the only options I can think of like that are CEDH and like 28 land aristocrat builds. Outside of that, I think you can definitely afford to swap out some of the most mana efficient cards possible for some of the more fun ones that do all the same jobs, but sometimes do them way more broadly and get you out of more situations more often as a result. But I do want to know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I'm sure there's some cards I've missed. There's tons I've missed, obviously. No part about this was supposed to be as inclusive as humanly possible. There's too many removal spells in Magic the Gathering. But I did want to know what y'all's thoughts are in the comment section below. I do want to know how y'all feel about this. I've already given my thoughts. I am more of a modality person over an efficient person. But I want to know where you are coming from if you have a different opinion. That all said, if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. Maybe consider checking out my Patreon and helping me out there if you really want. If you want to support the channel and what I do, then there is obviously the lovely, lovely playmat that was made by Stevie Cole. That is available on my Fourth Wall shop. And of course, if you want to follow what I'm doing live, then check out youtube.com/SurisLive or twitch.com/NekoSuris, where I stream every Monday through Thursday. That all said, thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you being here. And as always, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.